The moment I saw him flip through my phone, my heart lurched, not from the fear of being caught, but from the dread that he would see those messages. The ones I forgot to delete. I reached for the phone, trying to snatch it from his hands, but he jerked it away, holding it firmly as he continued reading. I watched his face change with each line, and it felt like my life was crumbling in front of me. Yes, he was about to know the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, and I knew he was just a few steps away from the message that would destroy everything. That one message, the one that would either explain everything or make it even more complicated. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in his hands, and a new notification appeared on the screen. I saw his face pale as he read the sender's name. He froze. Not even a blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves mixed with the raw panic of realizing what I had done. His breath quickened, I could hear it from 2 meters away. This was exactly what I feared most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake, the kind of mistake that changed everything, and now I didn't know what to do. But let me tell you how it all really happened. Before I share the secret I've been hiding for so long, leave a comment telling me where you're watching this from and answer me this. Have you ever had a secret you tried to keep hidden, but in the end, it all came crashing down? I never thought I would end up here, standing in my own home, watching my marriage slowly fall apart right in front of me. The silence between my husband and me was suffocating, and I hated every moment of it. It wasn't that he was a bad man, or that our life together had been filled with dramatic fights or betrayals. No. Our marriage was just dull. Routine. Empty. The passion was gone, and in its place was this cold indifference, this invisible wall that separated us. We had grown so used to it that it had become our reality. And then, as if by fate, he hired my nephew. At first, I thought it would just be another distraction, another person to occupy space in my already cluttered life. But when he walked into the office that first day, I felt something shift in me. He wasn't just a young man looking to prove himself, there was something about him that made me feel alive again. Maybe it was his enthusiasm, his energy, the way he looked at me like I mattered, like I still had something to offer the world outside of being someone's wife. Maybe it was the way his presence, his confidence, reminded me of the person I used to be before I got married, before I became so entangled in responsibilities that I forgot who I was. The first time we worked late together, I found myself noticing him differently. His voice was deeper than I expected, and the way he spoke, so assured and passionate about his work, made me realize how much I had been missing. Not just in my marriage, but in myself. It was as if I had been starved for something more, something that felt real. Something that made me feel like I wasn't just a background character in my own life. It wasn't long before I started looking forward to our late nights in the office. I would make excuses to stay longer, to work on things that could have waited until the morning. And he was always there, always willing to stay and help. His presence was a constant. He was attentive in a way that my husband hadn't been in years. He made me feel important, not just as an employee, but as a person. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what was happening. I was falling for him. And I knew that this was a dangerous game. I wasn't some naive girl in her 20s anymore. I had been around the block enough times to understand the consequences of what I was doing. But when he smiled at me, when he leaned just a little too close while we discussed a project, when his eyes met mine with a look that lingered a little too long, I found it hard to resist. The temptation was undeniable. And then one evening, everything changed. We were working late, just the two of us, and I could feel the tension in the air. The kind of tension that makes your heart race for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't like any other evening. There was an electricity between us that hadn't been there before. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way his gaze held mine just a moment longer than usual. I felt myself leaning in before I even realized what I was doing. I could smell his cologne, so close I could almost taste it. And then, without thinking, without saying a word, our lips met. We kissed. It wasn't some passionate, fiery kiss like you see in the movies. It was soft, hesitant, as if both of us were testing the waters, unsure of where this was going. But it was enough. Enough to send a shockwave through my body, enough to make me realize that I hadn't felt this alive in years. But it was also enough to make me realize how far I had crossed the line. When we pulled away, neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this to him? How could I explain it to myself? I had always prided myself on being strong, on being in control of my emotions, but in that moment, I felt completely out of control. I shouldn't have done that, I whispered, almost to myself. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step back, running a hand through his hair, clearly as shaken as I was. Yeah, he said quietly. Me neither. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he looked at me, that told me he didn't regret it. Not completely. And neither did I. That night, I went home, but I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind. I could still feel the warmth of his lips, the softness of his touch. It was like a spark had been ignited, and now, I couldn't put it out. The next few days were a blur. My husband didn't notice the change in me, or if he did, he didn't care. He was still wrapped up in his own world, indifferent to everything and everyone around him. I found myself growing more distant, more withdrawn. The things that used to matter didn't seem important anymore. The things that used to fill me with happiness, the family dinners, the quiet evenings at home, felt empty. I knew what I had to do. I had to face the truth. The truth about my marriage, the truth about my feelings, and the truth about the choice I had made. But as I stared at my phone that night, with my heart pounding in my chest, I realized that I was terrified. Terrified of what would happen if my husband found out. Terrified of what I had become. And yet, deep down, I knew there was no going back. No matter how hard I tried, there was no way to erase what had happened. The mistake had already been made. Now I just had to live with the consequences. But for now, all I could do was wait. And try to convince myself that everything was going to be okay. I tried to go back to my normal routine after that kiss. I told myself it was just a moment, just an impulsive lapse that would pass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. What we had done wasn't something I could easily forget or push aside. Every time I saw him, every time I passed by his desk at work, I felt it, the weight of that kiss between us. It wasn't just about the physical act, it was about everything it represented. It was about feeling seen again, feeling desired when I thought I was invisible. And that was the hardest thing to accept. I didn't speak to him about it after that night. I couldn't. I couldn't even look at him properly. It was easier to pretend like it had never happened, to keep up the charade that we were just colleagues, nothing more. But every time he looked at me, I could feel the unspoken question in his eyes. I wondered if he was struggling with it too. Was he regretting it? Or was he, like me, trying to ignore the fact that we had crossed a line neither of us should have crossed? The silence between us became unbearable. I could feel it every time we spoke, every time our paths crossed in the office. We no longer shared the same casual conversations we used to have. Instead, there was an awkwardness, a tension that neither of us knew how to navigate. One afternoon, a week after that kiss, I was sitting at my desk, lost in thought, when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. His energy was palpable, like a quiet storm waiting to erupt. Can we talk? He asked, his voice lower than usual. I nodded, my throat dry. I didn't want to hear what he had to say, but I knew it was coming. There was no way around it. The more we avoided the issue, the harder it would get. And I couldn't live like that, constantly wondering if he was going to bring it up, constantly afraid of what might happen if he did. I led him to the small conference room at the end of the hall, a place where no one ever bothered to go. It was our place now, the place where we could confront what had happened without anyone else watching. I shut the door behind me, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. He stood there for a moment, his eyes fixed on the ground. I could see his hands fidgeting, something he always did when he was nervous. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to him, not when I couldn't lie to myself. Finally, he spoke. I don't regret it, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. But I don't know what to do now. I swallowed hard, my own emotions swirling inside me. Me neither, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long time, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, feeling the weight of what we had done and what it meant. It was more than just a kiss, I realized. It was the beginning of something neither of us had expected. And I didn't know if I was ready for it. But I also didn't know how to stop it. How could I, when every time I looked at him, I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years? It was the feeling of being alive, of being seen and wanted. It was dangerous, and I knew it. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the danger. I wanted it. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I didn't want to make things weird. I don't know what to do now. I shook my head, my hands trembling slightly. You didn't make anything weird, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm married. I can't just ignore that. He nodded, his face pale. I know. I know you're married. And I'm not asking you to leave him. I just don't want things to be weird between us. I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of regret, of second thoughts. But there was nothing. There was just the same sincerity I had seen from the moment he walked into my life. He wasn't trying to push me into anything. He was just there. Waiting. I don't want things to be weird either, I said finally, my voice shaky. But I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what this is. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the small room. We'll figure it out, he said softly, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was so light, but it sent a shock through me. I looked at him, and for a moment, I felt like I could stay there forever. But the reality of my life, of my marriage, hit me like a cold wave. I couldn't forget who I was, or who I was supposed to be. I was a wife. I was committed to someone else. And yet, in that moment, I couldn't help but feel like I was standing at the edge of something new, something that scared me, but also something that called to me in ways I didn't understand. We'll figure it out, I repeated, but my words didn't sound convincing. They sounded more like a promise I didn't know how to keep. I pulled away from him slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I need time, I said, almost to myself. I need time to think. He nodded, stepping back, his eyes never leaving mine. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I left the conference room without looking back, my mind racing. I needed time to think. But I knew that the more time I took, the harder it would be to make a decision. And the more I tried to push away the feelings I was having, the more they seemed to take root inside me. When I returned to my desk, the reality of my situation hit me all over again. I was married, and I had responsibilities, commitments. I had a life that was already mapped out for me. But the problem was, I didn't want that life anymore. I didn't want to go home to an empty house where my husband and I barely spoke. I didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I was really afraid of wasn't the consequences of my actions. What I was afraid of was facing the truth about what I truly wanted. And the truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted the life I had anymore. The days that followed the conversation in the conference room were filled with a strange kind of silence. The air between him and me seemed charged, a constant reminder of what had happened. I found myself distracted, unable to focus on anything for long. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but I didn't know how to carry it. The harder I tried to push it away, the heavier it felt. Work was becoming unbearable. I would sit in meetings, my mind wandering, wondering what he was thinking, wondering what I was supposed to do next. But it wasn't just about him, it was about me, too. It was about who I was and what I wanted out of this life. I kept replaying the same questions over and over in my head. Was I making a mistake? Should I have stayed with my husband, as broken as we were? Was I just looking for an escape, a way to feel something other than the hollow emptiness that had filled our home for years? Or was this truly what I wanted, a chance to start over, to feel seen and desired again, to embrace the part of myself that had been buried for so long? I couldn't stop thinking about him, my nephew. His face, his eyes, the way he made me feel when he smiled at me. He had become this constant in my mind, an itch I couldn't scratch. But I also knew that I was walking a dangerous line, one I had already crossed. If I gave in now, there would be no going back. And the guilt was suffocating. Every time I thought about my husband, I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. He hadn't been perfect, but he hadn't been a monster either. He had loved me in his own way, but somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. We had grown apart, and I had allowed it to happen. I had let the years slip by without doing anything to fix it. I had let myself fade into the background, waiting for him to notice me again. But he never did. And now, here I was, standing at the edge of something that could change everything. If I left him, if I chose to walk away, I would be breaking the vows I had made, the promises I had kept for so many years. It wasn't just about my marriage. It was about everything, the life I had built, the family we had created, the future I thought we would share. But then, every time I thought about him, about the kiss we shared, about how it felt to be wanted and desired, all of that seemed so far away. My marriage felt like a distant memory, something that no longer held any weight in my life. It was as if I had outgrown it, outgrown him. That evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the empty space beside me. My husband was still at work, late as usual. I knew that, in a few hours, he would come home, sit in his chair, and watch TV. It was the same routine every night. And it was killing me. I thought back to the last few months, to the moments when I had tried to reach out to him, to revive the connection we once had. But he hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had, but he had chosen to ignore it. Either way, the result was the same, we were strangers living under the same roof. I got up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights below. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me again. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. But at the same time, I was terrified of what might happen if I made the wrong choice. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from him. My heart skipped a beat as I saw his name on the screen. I had been expecting this, in some way. I had known that he would reach out again. It was only a matter of time. Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. What was I supposed to say? Was I okay? How could I possibly be okay after everything that had happened? I'm fine, I typed back, knowing it was a lie. But I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him what I was really feeling. I couldn't tell him that I was torn, that I didn't know what I wanted anymore. That I didn't know what the right choice was. The message sat there on my screen for a few seconds, and then he replied. Asterisk, I miss you. Asterisk. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. The truth was, I missed him too. I missed the way he made me feel alive, the way he saw me for who I really was. And I hated myself for it. I hated myself for feeling this way, for allowing myself to get caught up in something that I knew was wrong. But I also knew that I couldn't stop myself anymore. I had already made the decision, whether I admitted it to myself or not. I was already in too deep. I heard the sound of the front door opening, followed by the familiar sound of my husband's footsteps. He was home. And I knew that this was it, this was the moment that everything would change. I could feel it in my bones. I quickly put my phone down and walked back into the living room. My husband looked up as I entered, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of what was going on inside my head. But I gave him nothing. I was done pretending. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living this lie. I'm going to bed, I said quietly, my voice distant. I didn't wait for his response. I just turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, staring at my back as I disappeared down the hallway. In that moment, I felt a rush of clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing, I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to move forward, even if it meant facing the consequences of my actions. Because in the end, I was the only one who could make the choice. And the only person I had to answer to was myself. The night felt longer than usual, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. I could still hear my husband moving around in the kitchen, his footsteps a dull rhythm that barely registered in my mind. I was no longer interested in what he was doing or where he was. I had shut myself off completely from him, from the life we had built, and the more I did, the more the silence between us seemed to grow. My mind, however, wasn't silent. It was loud, screaming with every possible thought and feeling, all jumbled together. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, the dark shadows of the room closing in around me. Every inch of my body felt alive in a way that was so foreign, yet so exhilarating. I had stepped into unknown territory, and now there was no turning back. The kiss replayed in my mind over and over again, that moment when everything had shifted. He wasn't just a young man who had helped me with work, he had become something much more. And as much as I tried to fight it, I couldn't stop wanting him. It was so wrong, yet it felt so right. I heard the familiar sound of the front door closing softly, and I knew my husband had finally retired for the night. He never said much when he came home late. He would just go to his room, change, and go to bed. Another part of the routine that we both had come to accept. I could hear the hum of the television in the background, a sound I had come to despise. It had once been a comfort, a small thing that connected us at the end of the day. Now, it was just another reminder of how far apart we had drifted. It was as if the distance between us had become so great that not even the walls of our house could contain it anymore. I sat there, unable to sleep, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I thought about the message from him earlier. I missed you. Those words had lingered in my mind since I read them, and now, sitting there in the dark, they were the only thing I could focus on. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how he made me feel, about how every part of me responded to his presence. It wasn't just about the kiss, or the way he looked at me. It was the way he had made me feel whole again, as if I had been broken for so long and had only now been put back together. I didn't know if it was right. I didn't know if this was something I should pursue, or if I was just looking for something to fill the emptiness that had settled in my marriage. I was so confused, and the only thing I could think of was how badly I wanted to feel alive again. As the hours ticked by, I felt the decision weighing on me more and more. I had to choose. Either I could continue down this path, let the relationship with my husband deteriorate even further, or I could step into the unknown with him. With my nephew. My phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment before I picked it up. The message was from him. Asterisk, I can't stop thinking about you. Asterisk. I closed my eyes, my heart racing. The words hit me like a wave, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend like nothing was happening. I typed back, my fingers shaking. Asterisk, I can't stop thinking about you either. Asterisk. As soon as I hit send, my phone buzzed again. Asterisk, what does that mean? Asterisk. I stared at the message, unsure of how to answer. What did it mean? It meant that everything I had been trying to avoid, everything I had been pretending wasn't there, was now a reality. It meant that I was at a crossroads, and I had to make a choice. A choice that would change everything. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where this would lead. But I knew that, right at this moment, it felt like I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. And as terrifying as that was, it was also the most thrilling thing I had ever felt. I put my phone down and got up, walking to the window. The moon was full, casting pale light over the city below. I could see the cars moving, the lights blinking, the people living their lives, all of them unaware of the storm that was brewing inside me. A storm that I had been trying to ignore, but now I knew I couldn't. I thought back to the conversation I had had with my husband before I went to bed. It had been quiet, almost too quiet. He had asked me if I was okay, and I had told him I was fine. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix us. I walked back to the bed, my hands trembling. My heart was still racing, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't see. All I knew was that, once I took that first step, there would be no going back. I would have to face the consequences of my actions. I would have to live with the choices I made. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. I heard the soft sound of my husband's breathing from the other room, and I knew that in a few hours, I would have to wake up and face him again. I would have to pretend that everything was normal, that nothing had changed. But nothing would be the same after tonight. I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me again. I couldn't keep pretending that I was happy, that I was content. I couldn't keep living in a marriage that had become a shell of what it once was. And I couldn't keep pretending that I didn't want him. That I didn't want something more. But I also knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to a life that no longer felt real. As I lay back down, I closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow would be the day I had to make a choice. And no matter what I decided, nothing would ever be the same. The next day was harder than I expected. My body felt heavy, like I was dragging the weight of 1,000 decisions behind me. I could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something had to give. I wasn't sure if it would be my marriage or the fragile boundary I had built between myself and my desires, but it was clear that I couldn't keep pretending forever. I spent the morning at the office, trying to bury myself in work, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts that kept circling in my mind. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept wandering back to him, his smile, the way he looked at me with such intensity, like I was the only person in the room. It was almost unbearable. I didn't want to feel this way, didn't want to be caught up in something so complicated, so messy. But I couldn't help it. I looked across the office at him as he sat at his desk, absorbed in his work. He glanced up for a moment, his eyes meeting mine, and I felt that same rush of warmth that I had felt when he kissed me. It was like a spark had been lit inside me, and no matter how hard I tried to douse it, it kept burning. The guilt hit me harder that day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying my husband, even though I knew we had drifted so far apart. Even though I knew we weren't really a couple anymore. I hadn't felt anything for him in so long, not love, not passion, not even affection. But I had made a vow, a promise, and breaking it felt like a sin, no matter how justified my reasons seemed. I didn't know how to reconcile what was happening between my husband and me with what was happening with my nephew. How could I possibly balance the two? Was it fair to him, to my husband, to myself? I didn't have answers. And the more I thought about it, the more lost I felt. At lunch, my husband called. I hadn't spoken to him much since the night before, and I could hear the tiredness in his voice when he asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said, the words coming out as automatically as they always did. But I wasn't fine. And I knew he knew that. There was an edge to his tone that made it clear he was starting to pick up on the distance between us, even though we hadn't said anything directly. "I'll be home for dinner," he said, sounding almost hopeful. It was clear he was trying. Trying to make things work, trying to reconnect. And for a moment, I felt guilty again, guilty that I couldn't give him the same effort, guilty that I wasn't ready to try. But as soon as the phone call ended, the feeling passed, replaced by the tension that had settled in my chest. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, barely managing to get through the day. I kept checking my phone, wondering if he would message me again. And sure enough, just as the workday was winding down, my phone buzzed. His name was on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Asterisk, "Are you sure about this?" Asterisk. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Was I sure? Was I sure about anything anymore? I didn't have the words to answer him. I didn't have the clarity to explain how I felt. I didn't know if I was ready for the consequences of my actions, or if I would even survive them. "I don't know," I typed back. Asterisk, "I'm scared." Asterisk. Asterisk, "We don't have to figure it all out now. Just know that I'm here, no matter what you decide." Asterisk. His words were comforting, and yet, they made me feel even more conflicted. He wasn't pushing me, wasn't trying to force me into anything. He was just there, willing to wait, willing to let me make up my mind in my own time. But was I really the one making the decisions? Or was I just being swept along by something I didn't understand? Every part of me felt torn in two. I knew I wasn't in love with my husband anymore. But I also knew that what was happening with my nephew, with him, was not something I could just walk away from. I couldn't stop it. And maybe, in some twisted way, I didn't want to. I put my phone down, leaning back in my chair and closing my eyes. The guilt was suffocating. I had betrayed my marriage long before the kiss. I had betrayed my own heart by staying in a relationship that no longer fulfilled me. And now, I was faced with the truth. I was capable of more than just the comfortable life I had been living. I was capable of breaking the very thing that had kept me tethered for so long. The office started to empty out, people leaving for the day, and I felt the isolation of my own thoughts creeping in again. I glanced at the clock, it was almost time to go home. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to face my husband. I had to live with the choices I was making. When I walked through the door at home, the house felt quiet. Too quiet. The faint sound of the television echoed from the living room, and I could hear my husband in there, flipping through the channels. He didn't even look up when I entered, as if he was waiting for me to make the first move, to bridge the gap that had been growing between us. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. My heart was racing, my stomach in knots. I had to say something, do something. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't know how to fix this, how to bring back what we had. I didn't know if it was even possible. "I'm home," I finally said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. He glanced up, offering a weak smile. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, though it had been anything but. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, not yet. Not when I wasn't sure what the truth even was anymore. He stood up, walking over to me. "We need to talk." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah. We do." We stood there in silence for a moment, two people who had once been so close, now unable to bridge the distance that had slowly crept between us. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the stillness. "I know things haven't been great. I've been distant. I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and for a brief moment, I felt the pang of regret. He was trying, and maybe I hadn't been. Maybe I had already checked out long before this. "I know," I said quietly. "I've been distant too." But as I said those words, I realized it wasn't just physical distance between us. It was emotional distance. And no matter how hard we tried, I wasn't sure we could ever bridge that gap. The evening stretched out, heavy and unbearable, as my husband and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the silence we had created. I hadn't known how to respond when he said we needed to talk. What could I say? I wasn't sure I had the words to explain what had been happening inside me, and if I did, I wasn't sure I wanted to say them aloud. It felt like the weight of everything was pressing down on me, suffocating me with the realization that I couldn't keep living this lie. We sat down on the couch together, the space between us still vast, still insurmountable. I looked at him, the man I had married, the man I had shared my life with. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him clearly, not just as my husband, but as a stranger. I didn't recognize him anymore. I didn't recognize myself either. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice tentative, unsure. "About everything. About us. I know things haven't been right for a long time. But I don't want to lose you." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had known that he was trying, that he cared, but hearing him admit it, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, made me feel like the worst kind of person. How had we gotten here? How had I allowed it to go this far? "I don't want to lose you either," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted hollow in my mouth. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. Because deep down, I knew that what I really wanted was something different. Something that I couldn't have, something that wasn't mine to claim. We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us trying to process the weight of our words. But there was no easy way to navigate this, no simple fix for the unraveling we had both ignored for so long. The space between us, the emotional distance that had been growing, had reached a point where I wasn't sure how to close the gap anymore. "I've been thinking too," I said, my voice trembling. "About what's been happening. About everything. And I don't know where we go from here." He nodded, his eyes searching mine for an answer, for a sign that things could be fixed, that we could somehow return to what we once had. But I knew, deep down, that it was too late for that. We couldn't go back. We had already crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. "I know things have changed," I continued, my words slipping out before I could stop them. "But I don't think it's just about us anymore. It's not just about what's happening between you and me. It's about me. About who I've become. And I don't know if I'm the same person I was when we first got together." My husband's face softened, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion. "I don't understand," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pain. What are you trying to say? I'm trying to say that I don't know if I can keep pretending, I replied, the words slipping from my mouth as if they had been waiting to be said for a long time. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I'm not happy. And I don't think I have been for a long time. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I watched his face fall, watched the realization settle in. He had known, I think, on some level, that I was no longer the same person I had been when we got married. But hearing it out loud, hearing me say it so plainly, was different. It was real. He looked away, his hands resting on his lap, clenched into fists. I didn't realize it was that bad, he murmured. I didn't realize you were feeling this way. I thought we were just going through a rough patch. I thought we could work through it. I know, I said, my voice breaking. I thought so too. But somewhere along the way, I think we lost each other. And I don't know how to get us back. There was another long silence, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. My heart ached for him, for us, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. And I couldn't keep denying what had been happening between me and my nephew. It wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was something that had changed me, something I couldn't ignore. I've been thinking about that kiss, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. About what it means, about what it represents. And I can't stop thinking about it. His eyes snapped to mine, his expression one of shock and hurt. What do you mean? He asked, his voice tight. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been feeling something I shouldn't be feeling, I said, the words spilling out faster than I could control them. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's fair. But I can't ignore it anymore. He shook his head, his face pale. You're talking about him, aren't you? About my nephew. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the admission settle on me. It felt like I had just confessed the worst crime I could ever commit. But in some twisted way, it was a relief to say it aloud, to stop pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. But I don't know how to undo it. I don't know how to fix what's broken between us. He sat there for a moment, his face a mixture of disbelief and hurt. So, what are we supposed to do now? He asked, his voice hollow. What happens next? I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't know what happened next. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between the past and the present, between the life I had and the life I thought I wanted. I had to make a decision. I had to choose. I don't know, I said, my voice cracking. But I can't keep pretending. And with that, the words hung in the air between us, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days following our conversation were filled with a heavy silence. It wasn't the kind of silence where nothing was said, but rather the kind where everything that had been left unsaid hung in the air like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. I could feel the weight of my words, the admission that things had changed between us, that I was no longer the person I had been when we first met. And now, as I sat in our living room, the house felt colder than it ever had before. I had never felt so torn, so conflicted. The house we had built together felt like a prison. I had once believed that I could spend the rest of my life here, in this space that had become so familiar. But now, every corner of it seemed to suffocate me, reminding me of everything I had lost and everything I was no longer willing to accept. The last few days had been a blur. I had tried to go about my routine as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible to pretend. Every interaction with my husband felt like an act, a performance I was no longer able to maintain. It wasn't just about the kiss with my nephew. It was about everything that had led to that moment. The years of neglect, the silence, the way we had both settled for a life that wasn't enough for either of us. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of the unknown, scared of the consequences of my actions, scared of losing everything. But what scared me more than anything was the realization that I was already losing everything: my sense of self, my happiness, my dignity. And yet, I couldn't let go. I couldn't bring myself to walk away from something that had been my life for so long, even if it no longer served me. That evening, my husband came home late, as usual. He didn't say much, just nodded in my direction as he entered the house. We had reached that point where words felt unnecessary, where silence had become our language. I could feel his presence, but it felt like he was a stranger. He no longer held the space in my heart that he once did, and it was as if the world had shifted in such a way that I could never go back to the way things were. I watched him as he moved around the house, preparing his dinner in the kitchen, the same routine we had done 1,000 times before. And yet, everything felt different. The small, mundane tasks we once shared now felt like an insurmountable distance between us. I had to make a decision. I had to face the reality of my actions and decide what I was going to do next. Was I going to stay and continue living this life, pretending to be someone I wasn't, or was I going to finally step into the unknown, into a life where I could be true to myself, even if it meant losing everything I had built? I knew that my decision wouldn't be easy, that it would come with consequences. But the longer I stayed in this marriage, the more I realized that I was already living in the consequences of my own choices. I couldn't continue like this, trapped in a life that no longer brought me joy or fulfillment. I stood up, feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. I had to talk to him, to face the truth of what was happening between us. It wasn't fair to either of us to continue living in this state of limbo. I found him in the kitchen, his back turned as he chopped vegetables for his dinner. He looked up when he heard me approach, his expression neutral. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He nodded, setting down the knife and wiping his hands on a towel. "Of course." We sat down at the kitchen table, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweating. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "about what you said the other night. About how we've grown apart." He didn't interrupt, just listened, his gaze soft but guarded. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I continued, "and about the life we've built together. And I've come to a difficult conclusion." His eyes darkened, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. "What conclusion?" "I don't think I can do this anymore," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I don't think I can keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I don't think I can stay in a marriage that has been broken for so long." The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't speak, didn't move. I could see the pain in his eyes, the hurt that I had just laid bare. I had expected this, had prepared myself for it, but that didn't make it any easier. "I'm not happy," I said softly, the admission feeling like a weight lifted from my chest. "And I don't think you are either. We've been living in this empty space, pretending that things are okay, but they're not. I don't want to lose you," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I've made mistakes. I've been distant. But I don't want this. I don't want to lose us. I don't know if we can fix this," I replied, the tears finally beginning to well up in my eyes. "I don't know if we can go back to what we had. I think we've already lost it." He looked down, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know how to fix this either." I reached out, touching his hand gently. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that things are okay when they're not. For a moment, we sat in silence, both of us lost in the weight of what was happening. I could feel my heart breaking as I watched him struggle, but I also knew that this was the only way forward. It was the only way for both of us to heal. I think it's time for us to let go, I said, my voice trembling. I think it's time for us to move on. And with that, I felt the finality of the decision settle over me. There was no going back. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, even if I didn't know what that would look like yet. The days after that conversation passed in a blur, and everything felt different. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, and I was no longer sure of my place in it. I woke up every morning with a sinking feeling in my chest, knowing that I had taken the first step toward a future I wasn't ready for. The reality of my decision had hit me hard, but even harder was the realization that I couldn't undo what had been done. I had walked out of that conversation knowing that it was the right thing, the only thing I could do. But the weight of that knowledge settled heavily in my chest as the days went on. I hadn't expected this kind of emotional toll. I had thought I was making a clean break, but the truth was, nothing was clean about it. There was no clear-cut way to untangle the mess I had created. I hadn't spoken much to my husband since that night. We shared the same space, but we had become strangers, each of us wrapped up in our own thoughts, trying to navigate the fallout of our broken marriage. He didn't argue when I told him I needed time and space. But I could see it in his eyes, the hurt, the confusion. It was impossible to ignore. And then, of course, there was him. My nephew. The man I couldn't stop thinking about, the man who had turned my world upside down. I had kept my distance from him, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew that seeing him meant acknowledging everything I had been trying to avoid. I had been avoiding him, avoiding the truth of what was happening between us. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The feelings I had for him were undeniable. I could feel them pulling me in, like a current I couldn't escape. I had told him I needed time, and he had respected that. He hadn't pushed me, but I could tell that he was waiting for me to make the next move. He hadn't said it in so many words, but I knew. He was waiting for me to decide what I wanted, and I didn't know if I even knew what that was. I spent a lot of time alone in the days that followed, trying to process everything. I spent hours walking around the house, thinking about the life I had left behind. I thought about the choices I had made, and the ones that were still ahead of me. I thought about the way things used to be, the way I used to feel. There was a time when I was happy, when I was content. But somewhere along the way, that happiness had slipped through my fingers, and I had let it go without even realizing it. I sat down one afternoon, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts, and I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to what I had, to what I thought I should want, that I hadn't stopped to consider what I truly needed. What I truly wanted. I had been so focused on trying to save my marriage, trying to hold on to something that was already gone, that I had forgotten to ask myself if it was worth saving. And the truth, as painful as it was to admit, was that it wasn't. The decision I had made wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about the kiss, or the connection I felt with my nephew. It was about me. It was about the woman I had become, the woman I was becoming. And I had to accept that I could no longer live in the shadows of my own life. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. It was time to face it head-on, no matter how painful it was. That evening, I sat down with my husband. He had been distant, but I knew we needed to talk. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I've been thinking, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. About everything. About us. And I think it's time for us to finally face the truth. He looked at me, his eyes weary but open. What truth? The truth that we've been living in a broken marriage for a long time, I said softly. The truth that we've both been pretending. I've been pretending. And I can't do it anymore. He nodded slowly, his face grim. So, what are we supposed to do now? He asked, his voice quiet but resigned. I think we need to let go, I said, my heart heavy. I think it's time for both of us to move on. The words hit him like a punch, and I could see the shock in his eyes. I had expected this, but somehow, hearing myself say it aloud made it even more real. This was happening. There was no turning back now. You're sure about this? He asked, his voice shaky. I am, I said, nodding. I've spent so much time trying to fix something that's already broken. And I can't keep doing it. We both deserve better. He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. And then, finally, he spoke. I never thought it would end like this, he said quietly. But I guess I've been too blind to see it. I've been too focused on myself to notice how far we've drifted. I could feel the weight of his words. The guilt that had been weighing on my chest seemed to lift slightly, but only slightly. There was still so much left to untangle, so much to process. But at least, for now, I had made my decision. I had chosen to stop living in a lie. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry. He didn't say anything. He just stood up and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the house. I watched him go, knowing that this was the last time I would see him in the same way. And as he left the room, I realized something else. I wasn't just letting go of him. I was letting go of a part of myself. The part of me that had held on to a dream of what my life could have been. The part of me that had held on to the idea of what I should want, what I should have. But in the end, I realized that I couldn't keep holding on to someone else's version of happiness. I had to find my own. And as I stood there, staring at the empty space where he had once stood, I knew that I was finally free to do just that. I woke up the next morning with a sense of finality, but also an overwhelming emptiness. My husband was gone, and the house was quiet. There was no tension, no arguments, no silent treatment. Just the stark quiet of a home that no longer felt like home. The decision I had made the night before echoed in my mind, louder now that it was a reality. I had chosen to walk away from my marriage, to leave behind a life I had known for so long. It wasn't an easy decision, and I wasn't sure if it was the right one. But in my heart, I knew it was the only one I could make. We had been living in the shadows of a relationship that no longer existed, and I couldn't continue pretending it was okay. The truth was painful, but it was liberating at the same time. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I was ready to dive into something new or if I even should. I had spent so many years in a marriage that had become so familiar, so comfortable, that the idea of being on my own felt strange, almost foreign. But I also knew that staying in something that wasn't fulfilling would only lead to more regret. I needed to start fresh, to find my own path, even if it meant doing so alone. The house felt emptier now that he was gone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had ended. But what? Was it the marriage? The life we had built together? Or was it the illusion I had been holding on to, the belief that we could fix things, that we could go back to the way things once were? I walked through the house slowly, taking in the small details, the pictures on the walls, the clutter in the kitchen, the places where we had once laughed and fought and shared our lives. Everything had changed, but everything had stayed the same. I could still see the echoes of our past, still feel the remnants of what we had lost. But now, it was just me. And for the first time in years, I realized that I didn't have to be defined by what I had lost. I didn't have to hold on to the past in order to move forward. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to do something different. To build something new. I picked up my phone and looked at the messages. There was one from my nephew. I hadn't spoken to him since that day we had shared our confessions. He had respected my need for space, and now, as I stared at the screen, I wondered if I was ready to face him. Was I ready to confront the feelings that I had been running from? Asterisk, how are you? Asterisk, the message read. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What did I want to say? How could I explain everything that had happened in such a short amount of time? How could I put into words the confusion, the guilt, the overwhelming desire to escape it all, while also knowing that something real had sparked between us? I typed back slowly, each word feeling heavier than the last. Asterisk, I'm figuring things out. It's been a lot. Asterisk. I stared at the message, wondering if it was enough, if it conveyed the weight of what I was going through. But it was the best I could do. I didn't have all the answers yet, and I didn't know where this was going. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Asterisk, take your time. I'm here if you need to talk. Asterisk. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of their own. He wasn't pushing me. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just there. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I wasn't sure where this was headed, or what would happen next, but I was no longer afraid of it. I took a deep breath and set my phone down, feeling a strange sense of peace. The storm inside me wasn't gone, but it felt like it had finally settled, like I had made the decision I needed to make. I had let go of the past, and now I had to face the future, whatever that meant. Later that day, I packed up some things from the house's clothes, important documents, a few sentimental items. It wasn't a huge amount, but it felt like a significant step. As I moved through the rooms, packing up my life, I realized that I wasn't just leaving behind my marriage. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had stayed trapped in it for so long. The version of me that had stayed in something that no longer made her happy, because it was easier than facing the unknown. As the last of my things were packed, I stood in the living room, looking around one last time. This house, this life, had been my world for so long. And now it was time to leave it behind. It was time to move on. I didn't know where I would go or what would happen next. But I knew one thing. I was done living in the past. I was done waiting for something that would never come back. I drove to a small apartment that I had rented for a while, a place where I could start fresh. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first real step toward reclaiming my life. As I walked through the door, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The space was small and empty, but it was mine. I could make it my own. I sat on the couch, looking out the window at the city below. It was a new beginning, a new chapter. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The following weeks were a blur. I settled into my new apartment, surrounded by boxes and half-empty rooms. Everything felt different, the space, the quiet, the freedom. At first, it was disorienting. I had spent so many years in a life I thought I was supposed to have, a life I had built around someone else's expectations. Now, I was starting over, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to navigate this new life I had chosen. But I also knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to let go of the woman I had been, the one who had clung to the hope that everything would somehow fix itself. I had to move forward, even if I wasn't entirely sure where that would lead. My days were filled with mundane tasks, unpacking, setting up my space, trying to adjust to a routine that no longer included the life I had left behind. It wasn't easy. I missed the familiarity of my old life, the comfort of my husband's presence, even though we had grown so distant. But what I missed more than anything was myself. The woman I used to be before I became consumed by the weight of my marriage, the woman who had dreams and aspirations beyond the confines of my relationship. One afternoon, as I sat in my new apartment, sipping tea and staring out the window, I received a message from him. My nephew. I hadn't heard from him in days, and I had been avoiding reaching out. But now, his message was sitting on my phone, a simple "How are you?" The question was innocent enough, but it stirred something in me. I hadn't been ready to face him, not completely. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open up to him, to admit the things I had been hiding from myself. But this was it. This was the moment I had been avoiding. I had to face the truth. I had to stop running from what had happened, from what I was feeling. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my jeans, and responded. I'm figuring it out. It's been a lot. It wasn't much, but it was honest. I was figuring it out. And that was all I could do. A few minutes later, he replied. Take your time. I'm here when you're ready. His words were kind, understanding, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't alone. I wasn't in this by myself. He hadn't pushed me, hadn't asked for anything more than I could give. And for that, I was grateful. I put my phone down and leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes. The weight of everything I had been carrying seemed to lift, just a little. I wasn't sure where this would go, what would come next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. I was ready to face it head-on. I spent the rest of the evening alone, thinking about my choices, about what I had left behind and what I was moving toward. There was so much that was still unknown, so many questions left unanswered. But I realized that the most important thing was that I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk. I needed some fresh air, some time to think without the constant reminders of the life I had walked away from. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The streets were quiet, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over everything. As I walked, I thought about the future. I thought about the possibility of building something new, something just for me. I didn't have to have all the answers right now, and that was okay. What mattered was that I was no longer tied to a life that didn't fit me anymore. I was free to make my own choices, to find my own path. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be days when I would doubt myself, when I would question whether I had made the right choice. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had made it this far, and I would keep going, no matter what. As I walked through the city, feeling the cool breeze against my face, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel alive again. I was no longer living for someone else, no longer trying to please anyone but myself. I was taking control of my own destiny, and that was something I had never truly done before. I thought about him, my nephew, and the connection we had shared. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew that I couldn't keep running from it. I had to face the truth, no matter how complicated or messy it might be. I wasn't ready to jump into anything new just yet, but I knew that I had to give myself the freedom to explore what was next, to explore what I really wanted. The world was full of possibilities. And for the first time, I felt ready to embrace them.